Let me ask you a question. Shimmy, shimmy, yeah, shimmy, yeah. Before the video starts, I'd just like to thank you guys so much for 500 subscribers. Or at least that's what I wanted to say, but before I could even thank you all for that goal, we already hit over 650. Wow. All jokes aside, thank you all for the support on the last few videos. It means the world to me that people actually care about what I have to say on these dumb video game topics. So the original goal was to hit 500 before the end of the year, but because at this point we're beyond that, what I was going to do was set a new goal for 700 before the end of the year, but at the time of writing this, the channel has 657 subscribers, so I wouldn't be surprised if we hit 700 before this video even comes out. So, I'm just gonna go for it. Let's hit 1K before the end of the year. That's the new goal. So, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I usually save stuff like this for the end of the video, but since we hit this milestone, I thought it was important to call attention to it immediately. Anyway, I've talked long enough. Let's get into the real video now. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a game that looked interesting to you, but you didn't know if you wanted to buy it, so you held off on its release day, but it looked so cool that you eventually just bit the bullet? Then, once you start playing the game, you realize how much of a dumbass you were for even thinking for a moment that there was a world where you didn't buy this game because it's just that good? So Atlas just released a brand new RPG, Metaphor Refantazio. Initially revealed as Project Refantasy, this game was a pet project for the famous game director Katsura Hashino, the creative director of Persona 3, 4, and 5. The game was initially revealed at the June 2023 Xbox Live show, although the trailer was leaked a few days beforehand, and was announced to be a late 2024 release. The game launched on October 11th, 2024 to critical and commercial acclaim from fans and journalists alike. The game sold over 1 million copies on release day, and I was not one of them. I bought it on October 13th after MJ told me how good it was, and holy shit guys, this game is good. Described as from the creative minds of Persona 3, 4, and 5, I already knew that I was going to buy this game, but since it wasn't a Persona game, I figured I'd wait a bit to pick it up because money is tight and I've got Marios to party. Then, I bought the damn thing, and guys, this might just be game of the year. Okay, so while I haven't finished the game yet, I wanted to talk about it here, because it does some of the most unique things I've ever seen in a video game, and I think its game design philosophy stands as a testament to how unique the medium of gaming is, while also serving as a slap in the face to essentially every basic convention in every RPG ever. Metaphor is already an amazing game, but keep in mind that I have not finished it, and that this video will act as a sort of first impressions, spoiler-free review of the game. I already have so many big projects in the works for this channel that a deep dive into this game most likely won't be happening for a very long time. But even so, I want to talk about it. All of this to say, please don't put spoilers in the comments. So, as I said, I'm not too far into the game yet, so I can't comment on the story as a whole yet, but even from what I have played, it's clear that this tale is going somewhere interesting, and there are already things that have happened in the early game's plot that I'd rather keep unsaid to avoid spoilers. The point I'm trying to make here is, this game has a demo that allows you to play the prologue, and I am not even joking when I say that there are plot twists and major story events that happen in just those few hours of gameplay. So if I don't even feel comfortable spoiling what happens in the demo of the game, I'm sure as hell not going to be spoiling what happens beyond it. So instead, I want to talk about the underlying themes of the story and the very start of the prologue, just to kind of give my first impressions of the unique method of storytelling that this game has right from the start. So here's the basic setup to Metaphor. The throne sits empty after the king's assassination. With no heirs, the will of the late king decrees that the next monarch will be elected by the people, and thus begins your fight for the throne. Yeah, I just quoted the Steam page, so it's hard to truly describe what makes the story of this game so great, but the best thing I can truly say is just play the demo. Trust me, you will love it. As I said before, there are plot twists as early as the first hour of the game, so it's so hard to explain the beginning of the game without any spoilers simply because of how crazy this plot can get so early on. The main overarching plot is running to be the next king, using social simulation elements from the Persona series in a completely new light as you try to gain public support for your cause. So far, what I find interesting about this game is its method of storytelling. That title doesn't lie, this thing is one big metaphor. Like, at the start of the game, you're asked to enter your name. Not the name of the protagonist. No, you need to enter your name. The game even double checks, asking if you're sure that what you entered is your real name, while letting you know that you will get to name the protagonist later. So right from the get-go, the game makes a clear effort to connect you to its story while also distancing yourself from the world that it's set in. I haven't seen my name pop up in any meaningful way yet, but I'm sure there's a reason that the game makes you make this distinction. Most games have you enter your name as the protagonist, offering the protagonist as a self-insert character, a representation of you. Hell, that's why character creators exist. Yet this game, for some reason, makes that distinction clear, asking first for your own name while letting you know that this is not what the main character will be called, and then later, about an hour in, we get to name that character. It's interesting, isn't it? You give me the ability to name the protagonist whatever I want, but you go out of your way to ensure that I know not to name him myself? Unlike literally every other game that lets you name the protagonist ever? Why? How is my real name going to play into the story? I don't know yet, but I'm excited to find out. When we get into the real game, so many interesting little tidbits about this world start to open up to us, and I like how it isn't just explained to the player what's going on, because we aren't the character we are playing as. He already knows how this world works, so he doesn't need an explanation. Rather, we're supposed to pick up the pieces through conversations. In this world, people are split up into tribes by birth. The character we play as is an Elda, which is one of the most discriminated against tribes in the world. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that this game is about inequality. But I think Metaphor goes about the topic in a really interesting way. The characters are constantly reading from this fantasy novel, and the more they read about it, the more it becomes clear that this novel is about our world, and yet it's described as a utopia. The people reading it almost always say that this fantasy is far too good to be true and is unrealistic, while we the players all know the truth. Our world sucks! It creates a sort of grass is greener motif, giving us the idea that even people in a fantastical world filled with magic wish for a life that wasn't so complicated, and that the fantasies we dream about would never be as great as we imagine them. No matter what world you live in, inequality will always exist, so you shouldn't try to escape to a fantasy. You should fight to fix the world you live in now. I'd also like to point out the way people react to the king's death at the start of the game, and how people in the society are afraid of the idea of anyone being able to be king because up until this point in history, the royal family has consisted only of the Clamar tribe. The game makes it very obvious just how much better of a position the Clamars are in. There's a side quest where you have to enter a church, but the priest upcharges you because apparently the religion that the Clamars follow says that all Elda are demons incarnate. When you try to take on a side quest from a Clamar in the first town, he'll ask you to take a few steps away from him. NPCs will actively tell you to get out when you're just walking through town. The whole tribe thing is a fascinating plot point that has only opened up as I've continued to play, with one of the big plot points being just how monumental it could be if someone of a lower tribe took the throne. One last thing I'd like to bring up is the humans. The humans are what this world's inhabitants call a specific type of monster. That's right, the monsters you fight are called humans, but the human-like residents of this world are not. They're only referred to by their tribe, which, the more I think about it, the more tribe seems less like social constructs, like what the name implies, and more like the species of these people. Maybe that's the point, though. Something that seems so definitive is referred to by a term that we see as, by definition, malleable, showing the inequality in this world as a whole and calling attention to the idea that, despite how different these people are, there's nothing that makes any of these tribes definitively better than one another, and yet everyone in this world seems to know and take as a fact this social hierarchy of the tribes. Like, the game keeps referring to this whole lower versus higher tribes thing, but it seems a bit weird, doesn't it? Like, the Clamar are this hugely prominent tribe, basically the only one with full rights, and yet there are plot points about how they had to develop igniters, which are tools that help people cast magic, and yet there exists an entire race of people, the fairies, who are just born with the ability to cast magic. Here's a tribe with wings, here's a tribe with incredible hearing, here's a tribe with incredible sight, and yet all of these people are considered lower class? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this whole plot point is a metaphor for, say it with me everyone, racism! Instead of embracing the differences of all these tribes, the higher class people instead choose to shun them for being different and develop solutions to combat any advantages they might have on the upper class. Because
when everyone's super, no one will be.
On the contrary, humans are the opposite. Instead of handing out all these terms to refer to these different people who are generally largely the same in terms of how they interact with the world, they hand out one broad term to encompass what seems to be several different types of monsters. I mean, the game classifies both of these creatures as human despite how entirely different they look, and more importantly, how much of a departure they are from what we would describe as human. But I think the point of all of this is to emphasize human nature. Not those humans, no, I mean actual humans. Sorry, this terminology is getting confusing. What I mean by all of this is that we as a society are so quick to refer to someone or something as such a hyper-specific term, based on first impressions, rather than the whole package of what you're referring to. When someone is labeled as a bad person, it feels like people latch on to details of who they are and what they did, but on the other hand, when someone is referred to as a good person or can accomplish something specific, we always latch on to that specific detail of that person. When, generally speaking, we must look at the whole of someone and who they are rather than what they are. That's not to say that people don't deserve backlash for being horrible, or that people don't deserve praise for doing something amazing, but someone so good could have selfish or nefarious intentions behind their actions. Nothing in this world is as black and white as humans versus a monster, because honestly, are they not the same thing? At first, I didn't think too deeply about this detail, because the game didn't give me much to work with. That was until I heard this line.
But our town's just rubble now. A footnote in history. The human that destroyed us is all we'll ever be known for.
This happens just a few hours into the prologue, and I think it puts the message of this game into perspective. People are always so quick to label others a villain or a monster that, even if that may be true, they don't stop to think about what those actions truly mean. When we learn about terrible events in history, what do we cover? The people that caused them, mostly, from the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson, to that one thing that happened in World War II. I don't want to get my video taken down, but if you've ever opened a history textbook, you know what I'm talking about. To even now with what's going on in Israel. We rarely focus on the victims of these terrible events. Instead, we focus on the monsters who brought them about. But isn't that what they want? The attention? Yeah, so instead of providing support to the families and friends of the people who lost their lives, let's focus on the humans responsible for this trauma and let the names of those people fade into obscurity as history forgets that these numbers and metrics once represented lives. Naming the monsters of metaphor humans draws a connection to this idea. And I think this was the point of the developers in using this naming convention. To make these terrible events in this fantasy world feel more real to a grounded audience. So, going into this game, I knew very little about the actual gameplay, other than that it would be in a similar vein to Persona. And while that is true, the actual gameplay loop on display here is far more in-depth than I ever could have imagined. Metaphor uses the archetype system, which acts as classes for each of the characters you use in battle. I'd say the archetypes work similarly to how Personas work in the average Persona game and how demons work in the average SMT game, but the difference is how they're executed. Every character has a starting archetype, but beyond that, every archetype you unlock can be applied to any character. This means that anyone on your team can have any playstyle, with the levels of the character being separated from the levels of their archetype, making it so you don't have to completely restart if you want to approach a situation from just a slightly different angle. Only one archetype can be equipped per character, and they can't be changed on the fly. You have to plan out which characters are going to utilize what archetypes before going into a battle, which adds this extra layer of strategy that makes the game feel open to possibilities while also not feeling like you're just taking advantage of the mechanics of the game to have an easier time than what would have otherwise been. For example, there's this one secret boss near the start of the game that I was trying and failing to beat. I figured out that one of the archetypes I was using, Healer, was weak to this boss's attacks, so I couldn't use that archetype for this battle, could I? But then how would I heal? Well, what's cool about this mechanic is that archetypes can inherit skills from other archetypes that a certain character has used. So in this instance, I was able to switch the protagonist archetype to something else, and since the protag had studied the healer archetype before this new archetype I was using could inherit one skill from any other archetype I had studied, so of course I chose a healing skill, just to not miss out on the benefits of that other archetype. It's not as good as having a whole array of healing moves, but in a situation like this, it's what I needed to do to give myself the advantage against this boss. There's just one little problem with this though. I had already expended almost all of my MP while going through this dungeon, and I knew that this boss was weak to... My alarmo just went off. And I knew that this boss was weak to piercing skills. That's not a problem, I should be able to use a synthesis attack to deal some good damage, but I don't have the MP to do that consistently. A synthesis attack is an attack that draws on the MP from two different characters on the battlefield to do a super attack. Different combinations of archetypes produce different results in what a synthesis move does. I had discovered that a move that was extremely effective against this boss was the one I got from having both a warrior and a knight use a synthesis move. Problem was, I only have enough MP on the knight to get one of these attacks off. So what did I do? I switched the protagonist to the knight archetype, and with a combination of skill inheritance, attack buffs, and some well-timed synthesis attacks, I was able to dish out enough damage to eventually beat the boss, even in what seemed like an impossible situation. To make a long story short, my creativity and how I set up my different archetypes allowed me to turn what was an unfair and frustrating boss into a complete cakewalk once I nailed down my strategy. And it's this flexibility in the game design that makes Metaphor's gameplay loop work, in my opinion. It's about planning and creative thinking rather than brute force and spamming the same moves over and over again like so many turn-based RPG games do. Speaking of turn-based games, I'm not sure I would even classify this game as one of them. Well, that's going a bit too far. It definitely is fundamentally turn-based in its combat, but it combines those elements with real-time combat effectively to create an engaging mix between the two. In the overworld, when you see an enemy, you have a few choices. Hitting the squad option will take you into a battle with that enemy normally. But that's not fun now, is it? By getting closer to the enemy, you can attack them in real time using dodges and whatever weapon the protagonist has equipped. You can beat enemies in the overworld, but you do very little damage compared to when in a battle, and get far fewer rewards. So neither of these options sound too great, but when you combine them, it's a whole different story. By attacking an enemy in the overworld, you can chip away at their health bit by bit before entering a battle, making it easier to win once you're in the battle. If you attack enough times, you can knock the enemy backward and stun them, allowing to start a turn-based battle with an advantage against the enemy. Generally, this is what you want to do, as then you have twice as many turns as you would have before the enemy can attack you, since their stun makes it so they can't move for their first turn. But even beyond this, there's more to overworld exploration than meets the eye. If you highly outclass an enemy, normally you can kill them before even initiating a stun, allowing you to avoid battle entirely. It's interesting to see how far you can go in the overworld before you have to enter a battle, because after even just a few levels, enemies that once gave you trouble can be one-shot without even thinking about it. This goes the other way around though. If you misjudge an enemy and try to attack it without realizing that you made a mistake, they can easily attack you right back. If you just go around willy-nilly trying to kill everything in sight, eventually you're going to come across, say, a monster with a shield, and if you're not careful about where you attack it, it can easily block your weapon and hit you right back. If it hits you, this will normally just start a battle with the enemy having the advantage, which is manageable and forgiving, but just like you don't have to fight enemies beneath you, a monster that far outclasses you can easily kill you in the overworld without a second thought. Sometimes it's just a better idea to initiate a battle from a distance rather than attacking and getting ambushed. When you're in a battle, the playing field is far more even. In a turn-based RPG like this, especially counting for the archetype mechanic, even if a monster seems way over-leveled and the situation seems impossible, careful thinking and well-put-together archetypes can get you through a tough situation. But in the overworld? Yeah, go and hit that giant hulking beast with that flimsy sword, I'm sure you'll be fine. But even then, it's the exact same thing the other way around. Even if an enemy is easy and you beat it in the overworld, or at least easily ambush it without much trouble, if you decide to quote-unquote take the safe route and just initiate a battle with everything without even trying to get the advantage with real-time combat, you may end up with a situation where this little monster that you most likely could have just one-shot outside of battle just so happens to have skills that the archetypes you have equipped are weak to. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting bodied by something you could have just flown by. There's no such thing as taking the easy way out in Metaphor, or at least it's not the same for every encounter. Real-time combat might work great for one enemy, but that doesn't mean you can rely on it for every enemy. Sometimes you just need to start a battle. Other times you should attack it outright, and most of the time you need to find a mix between the two styles to efficiently get past an enemy. Of course, finally, there's the system that relates the most to Persona, and is one of the biggest points of comparison when this game is discussed online. That being the follower system. So, to unlock new archetypes, you need to acquire new followers. Each archetype is connected to a different follower and unlocks new abilities as you level up your rank with a follower. The method of finding followers and ranking them up is essentially identical to Persona's social link system. It's just the rewards that you get from ranking up a follower are different than ranking up a social link. So yeah, this game runs on a day system, and spending time with a follower will take up time in the day. There's also royal virtues, which work like social stats. You know, you can't rank up a follower past a certain point until you have level 3 courage or level 2 understandings. Things like that. As someone who loves how this system works in Persona games, I can say with confidence that I love how it works here as well. Being able to spend time with characters and see their own stories develop is just as interesting here as it is in the Persona series, and if I could be honest with you, I kind of prefer the rewards you get from it in this game more than Persona. Don't get me wrong, social links are helpful in Persona games, there's no two ways about it, but they feel a little more optional in Persona games, and that's the point. It's up to you to decide how much effort you put into understanding these characters, and by strengthening these bonds with people, the power of your soul, your persona, also strengthens through XP boosts in the Velvet Room, and even certain personas that you can't get without interacting with a social link. However, I think the archetype system also makes use of this idea well. Like, entire new styles of gameplay open up to you by establishing new followers, and as you rank up those followers, their archetype gains more power, with things such as them being able to inherit more than one skill from other archetypes, which is extremely helpful. I think it's up to preference. To be honest, Metaphor incorporates the system far more directly to battle, whereas Persona is more of a gradual increase in power as you strengthen your bonds with the people around you. I think the way it's implemented in both these games works well for the themes of each story, and I'm surprised to see this system incorporated so elegantly into such a different game. Metaphor is one of those special games, an experience that comes along rarely and unexpectedly, a game that establishes itself as an instant classic, dare I say, a modern masterpiece. I'm not sure what I'll think of this game once I beat it, and I don't like to label pieces of art that I have yet to fully experience, but even so, I can tell you with complete certainty that we have something special on our hands with this game. The best way to describe it is that I feel a similar sort of feeling that I felt when I first experienced Pikmin and Persona. Will it reach the top of my favorite games list? Maybe. Will it beat out either of these franchises and establish itself as a new favorite franchise? It's possible. I don't know yet. But what I do know is that this is a game that just works. Everything here seemingly perfectly combines to make a balanced, fun, and impactful experience, and I'm not even halfway through the game yet. Doing this whole YouTube thing has allowed me to look at some of my favorite games through a critical lens, more so than I ever had before. But one thing that I often find myself thinking about is that initial experience. Yeah, I can tell you everything there is to know about the Pikmin series, and trust me, I will. But what was it about the series that captured me when I was little? This isn't the video to discuss that, but my point here is that Metaphor is the first game in a long time where I genuinely feel invested and curious about everything this game has to offer. This feels like the type of game that, when I beat it, I'll be saying how I'd give up anything to experience it for the first time again, like I so often do when it comes to some of my other favorite games. The TLDR here is, I really like Metaphor, and I'm excited to keep playing it. And if you post spoilers in the comments, I will be crying myself to sleep tonight.